Okay, well, it's 9:32 by my watch. We have general government on January 25th. We have a 4-item agenda. We are awaiting one more council member, Ed Kunkel, but we're going to start without him since we do have a fairly full agenda. The first thing on the agenda is to elect a chair for this year.
Well, I move that we adopt today's agenda.
Oh, it's probably a good idea. I'll second that motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any objection? No? Motion carries. Thank you. First on the agenda is to elect a chair for this year.
I would nominate Lenny Greenstein to be the chair of the General Government and Public Safety Committee.
Okay, I don't think there's any other nominations. So we'll close the nominations, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No opposition? Thank you. I appreciate that and be glad to do that. In that case, we'll move right on to second item on the agenda, which is the introduction of our new deputy chief. And I think our chief, Almada, is going to take that one.
Good morning.
Morning.
Welcome you all. It's good to see you this morning. My name is Robert Almada, your chief of police. And this morning I have the honor to introduce our new deputy chief of police, Robert Bobby Hollis. Comes to us from the city of Kent. He's been with us for the last month and a half or so, and has been doing great things, but I'll let him speak a little bit to himself, a little bit of his background, and introduce himself to the committee.
Great.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. As the chief mentioned, my name is Robert Hollis. I go by Bobby. So if you see me wandering around the halls lost, I'm not really lost. Feel free to call me out by name. It's not a problem. I'm a 2-time graduate of the University of Washington. I got my undergraduate degree in sociology, got my executive master's in public administration. And as Chief mentioned, I've been working as a commander, or I've been at the city of Kent for the last 15 years. In that capacity, I worked as a PIO. Most recently, I worked as our race and equity commander. And so really in that position, I was going out, speaking with community members, talking with groups that really aren't really represented in government, and listening to what their concerns are and finding out different ways about how community and police can come together. So that's a little bit about me. I've been enjoying my time here so far, and I look forward to being here for many more years. So thank you very much for having me this morning.
Well, welcome. It's good to have you, and I'm sure the chief is happy to have a deputy there that he can count on for support and help.
Absolutely.
I do indeed. So actually, I'm quite happy to have Bobby on board. He's already launched into a couple of projects that we'll talk about, I think, during the course of this meeting. But again, thank you for welcoming him and for letting us be part of this meeting today.
Thank you. Great meeting.
I do want to let the committee know that we've already talked to Bobby about his affiliation with Washington, so we're working on that.
Hey, go Dogs! I'm a UW. So.
If you couldn't find a gator, I guess you'd be okay.
Well, welcome to the Lacey family. We really appreciate you being part, and it's an exciting time. And Lacey, there's a lot going on, as you know, and we're a growing city, and obviously we're looking at a new police station as well. So it's a really big time in the city of Lacey. So yeah, welcome.
Excellent. All right, we're going to move right on, and it's still you, Chief. Lacey Police Department 2020 crime recap and stat preview.
All right, so thank you. So today we're going to offer a bit of a retrospective going back to 2020, kind of discuss how the pandemic impacted the department and the city. Then give you a preview of 2021, even though those stats have not been finalized by WASPIC. We'll give you a preview with the caveat that those numbers are subject to change because they are preliminary. But we should provide you with some insights as far as 2021 and what's been going on. But I would be, frankly, would be wrong if I didn't comment on kind of where we're at in society and with law enforcement and where we stand. So in the first 24 days of this year, there have been 22 attacks on law enforcement, meaning that they've been subject to gunfire on 22 different occasions, resulting in 4 officer deaths so far this year. with that saying, our own officers are not away from this process. 2 of our officers were attacked this past week, and luckily to survive that deadly force encounter. So just need to take a notice of that, and that it is an interesting time, to say the least, to be in law enforcement. So just having that in the background in our thoughts. I just want to thank the council for, frankly, the good training and good equipment that allowed our officers to survive. So thank you. All right, with that, I'll share my screen with talking about 2020 a bit. Are you able to see that okay?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, we'll launch into this. I'll try to be fairly quick with some of the things. It's a little data intense. So, all right. So quickly, we'll talk about 2020. We'll talk about the crime rate in 2020. We'll preview the 2021 data. Even though it is preliminary, please understand the numbers are subject to change. Talk about the impacts of the pandemic, legislative reform, the Lacey Police Department activity during these time periods, and give you a sneak peek into some crime trends that we saw in 2021 and how that might impact the current year. So things that we needed to note in 2020, obviously significant pandemic related impacts. The majority of the community stayed home for the majority of 2020 in compliance with public health recommendations. Our police officers limited non-essential enforcement activity for a significant portion of 2020 to minimize the risk related to COVID. That included minimizing in-person contacts, handling as many calls via phone as possible, those type of things. Custodial facilities increased criteria necessary for booking and detention of arrestees to reduce jail population in order to limit the transmission of the virus. That impacted both Thurston County, Olympia, and Nisqually. As also, our traffic and pedestrian levels of contact and activity were reduced, as with most of the community was staying home. Also, we had the social justice movement sweep across the country. Locally, that impacted the city of Olympia primarily, which experienced a number of demonstrations and protests, and requiring the city of Lacey's police department to provide mutual aid on over 50 occasions. Generally, that consisted of handling their east side calls and occasionally responding to demonstrations to assist. So let's talk about 2020. So our incidents reduced by almost 17% during 2020 due to people staying home. Reports also were reduced by about 12.5%. The arrests, again, were down by 23%, which is consistent with the level of activity that we saw, reduced in all sectors. And obviously, interviews of people in the field reduced by about half. Again, really trying to limit that interpersonal contact to limit infection, the risk of infection. Tickets were down by about half, like we said, and DUIs were down by about 11%. Notice that percentage is less than the other percentages of reduction. We still place an emphasis on DUI arrests and public safety. All collisions in the city were down. All those collisions involved DUIs, which accounts why those numbers weren't down either. But the injured collisions were down again by 30% with all collisions. Administration, this is the one area that we saw an uptick in the one area. Public disclosure requests were down. Concealed weapons permits were only slightly down, almost the same. But firearm purchases were way up by about 80%, almost double from the prior year. Very consistent with what we saw across Washington, across the United States. After the social justice movement, a lot of people started buying firearms for a variety of reasons. 2020 crime rate per 1,000 residents. In the state of Washington, the average was 65.3 crimes per 1,000 residents in the population. As you'll see, Lacey was 53.1, which is lowest of all our comparators, both locally and in Lakewood and Puyallup. Pretty pleased with that. Again, the violent crime rate in 2020 for across the state was 3.4 violent crimes per 1,000 members of the population. Again, we were way below both the state average and our local comparators by a significant amount, which goes to the fact that Lacey is a very safe place to be. So that was 2020. I know it's rather quick, but it kind of gives you a quick recap of what 2020 was, kind of thinking back over a year ago. And let's go to 2021, which just ended. So a lot of impacts in that year as well. We had significant pandemic-related impacts. We had widespread access to the vaccine, which allowed the ending of lockdowns. More folks started venturing out into the community. While the communities were still working from home or a hybrid model and started to return back to school, our custodial facilities are still limiting bookings for both nonviolent and non-mandated offenses. Warrants for low-level offenses are not being confirmed, being that we cannot book those warrants. Even though we contact people, if the warrant's not confirmed, we can't book them into a custodial facility. Also, legislative impacts. There was dramatic police reform legislation enacted mid-year of 2021. We were given a very short period of time to put those legislative reforms into effect, which required us to dramatically change policy, train our personnel, and take equipment out of service, limiting our force options. The new legislative model emphasizes a post-crime response versus intervention and proactive law enforcement, meaning that you have to have probable cause in order to detain somebody, which is the same level of proof required to arrest somebody. So the idea of a reasonable suspicion detention was no longer allowed under the new legislation. Also, the new legislation did not define key terms such as physical force, which is key to allow an officer to actually enforce the law. And detention, like I said, the probable cause standard was there and not the reasonable suspicion standard. This really effectively prevents our ability to engage in proactive or preventative policing for most crimes. Just an example, you might get a report of open air drug dealing. Well, unless I can prove those are drugs that are controlled, it's not a crime that I can arrest and detain for. That I don't have probable cause. I have a reasonable suspicion that's occurring. I don't have probable cause, so I don't have the means to have a detention of those people to investigate that crime.
What's the status of that legislation? I know that we have worked to try to make some improvements on that legislation, and we've received some assurances that's going to happen. You know where we're at in that process?
Yes, as a matter of fact, that was on my item to talk about, and I'll jump forward to that since you brought it up. Really want to talk about House Bill 2037. House Bill 2037 comes the closest to bringing back the legislative reforms to a reasonable level that would allow for reasonable suspicion and allow a wider definition of physical force. Actually would define physical force, which is not currently. It would allow the use of force in more than just the restricted situations that's allowed for now, which is simply arrest and to protect from imminent harm and bodily injury. Pretty limited right now. So the wider definition would allow us to enforce court orders, child custody, take children into custody for their own protection, mental health, ITAs, Involuntary Treatment Act, detentions, those type of things. Medical patients, frankly, a medical patient that is out of control, trying to hurt themselves, we'd be able to step in and assist the fire department with controlling that patient so they can get the aid they need. All those type of issues. So actually, I would really ask the council and this committee to endorse House Bill 2037, which comes the closest to really right-sizing this legislation, coming to line what has always been the Lacey Police Department's view of force, with the included WASPIC amendments.
Great. If you would let this committee know when that's going to have a hearing and so on and so forth, so we can sign up at least in as a pro. If not testify, we'd appreciate that.
Thank you. So it happened this morning at 8 a.m. or 8:30. Actually, Officer Westfall, who's our TAC officer at the Academy, testified in support of that bill at our behest. He has been having ongoing conversations with the Public Safety Committee as well as myself, and they've really been open to understanding some of the issues that we have and understanding that we do need a definition of physical force. And I believe the Lacey definition is the most reasonable. And I'll speak to that later in this presentation. But thank you.
If there's going to be a hearing on the Senate side, then let us know.
I will. Thank you. Okay. Through 2021, we saw, like I said, an uptick in activity, but still rather suppressed because of legislation, because of the pandemic effects. And also remember, this is comparing back to the prior year, which was also suppressed. So our Lacey incidents are still relatively low, still reduced by about 1%. We are increasingly writing police reports, which is an increasing administrative load, but we continue to do that. Again, it's the after the fact documenting that we're forced to do at this point, rather than preemptive, proactive law enforcement. Arrests are down by 20% approximately. Field interviews are down, or about the same, around 2% within the margin. Police department citations are just about up a little less than 1%. But note, I was able to add my traffic officer back. Initially, the traffic positions rolled into patrol staffing because we were low on staffing. We reached the point where I was able to break out one of those traffic positions and dedicate him solely to traffic functions and support patrol in his off time. Again, DUI arrests are up about 22%. That's consistent with people being back out on the road and us doing more traffic enforcement. All collisions in the city have risen. Of course, we had a suppressed level last year, but people are out and they're driving. They got used to driving fast during the pandemic, and sort of slowly but surely getting them to realize they have to abide by the speed laws. Again, records administration, more public disclosure requests, which is to be expected with people being out more, have more requests. Concealed weapons permits are about the same. We've had a slight dip in our firearms process, but remember they were up almost double the prior year. So still it's elevated from what we've seen historically. Let's talk about crime. So these are the 2020 numbers, but I have put in red what our 2021 number is estimated to be, which is 55.7 crimes per 1,000. Again, this is below the state average from last year. I believe this was below the state average for 2021 as well. Again, Lacey continues to be a very safe place. For violent crime, again, the state average in 2020 was 3.4. Here in the city for 2021, our estimate is approximately 2.68, which is a 12% increase. However, it is very low compared to the prior year and overall crime throughout the state. So again, Lacey continues to be a very safe place to be. Let's speak to professional standards. So one of the impacts of the legislation was to really radically prevent pursuits for a variety of reasons. Historically, the city of Lacey has restricted pursuits on a pretty dramatic degree for a good reason. The two pursuits you see here were done prior to the legislative reform. There have been no pursuits since that legislation was put into effect. Again, as you can see, we're very low on pursuits as it is. So our personnel complaints, again, 6% for 2020. Our historical average is around 11.6 over the last 10 years. Again, 6% is fairly reasonable. Of the 6 complaints, 3 were for courtesy, 2 involved the use of force evaluation, and 1 was for an alleged policy violation. Of those 6 complaints, 3 were unfounded, 1 was sustained, and 2 are currently still under investigation. Of those 6 complaints, 4 were external to the department and 2 were generated internally. So on the issue of force, which we were discussing earlier, really important that folks understand how much we value the community and the faith the community has in their law enforcement and their police department. We take a very, very comprehensive review of all uses of force, and we document all uses of force. So while some departments in the state throughout the country only document force if there's an injury, that's not our take. We document all uses of force for accountability, transparency, identify any effectiveness of our training and opportunities for improvement. And the definition of physical force that we use here and always have is it's the application of any technique, tactic, or weapon to another person reasonably likely to cause transient pain and or injury. It is not a use of force when a person consents to being searched, escorted, handcuffed, or restrained. That's a pretty comprehensive definition, and that is the definition very similar to what's used throughout the country for best practice. It's very close to the policy being put forth in House Bill 2037 with the WASPIC amendments. So using that very, very strict definition, let's look how that kind of plays out in 2021. So Lacey Police Department responded to almost 40,000 incidents in 2021. We wrote almost 6,000 reports. We made little over 1,200 arrests in 2021. And of those 1,200 arrests, we only used force 38 times. That's less than 3% of all arrests. That's pretty impressive.
Amazing. Wow.
And that is a reduction of 17.5% from the prior year. That's during a pandemic year with suppressed activity. Our folks are very good at de-escalating and talking folks into handcuffs. So let's talk about the type of use force. The majority of it was on the minor end of the scale. The wrap, as you know, is a restraining device used so folks can't hurt themselves. It's a 4-point restraint where they're in a seated position. So in fact, we've headlined this device throughout Thurston County, and Thurston County Lacey Fire is looking at using it as well. And we're getting the presiding medical authority to develop some measures on it as well. So really a great device, really good for preventing folks from hurting themselves and allowing them to get treated. Like I said, that's the majority of what we've done. Get a push, we had some wrist locks, we took someone to the ground 6 times, a hair hold. As you get into the moderate range, we had a leg sweep takedown. We'd used the taser 5 times. We had a punch or kick 4 times. And we used the extended range impact weapon prior to the legislation 2 times. As you know, with the new legislation, those were taken out of service, including the beanbag shotgun and the 40mm launcher. Those were taken out of service since they were forbidden by the legislature. We replaced that with the FN-303 pneumatic launcher, which we've been using since the late summer as a kind of a midline measure until we get the other weapons replaced, hopefully, or reinstated in this new legislation.
Chief, can you describe that other alternative weapon that you're talking about?
So if you know what a paintball gun is,
Right.
it's kind of like the big brother of a paintball gun.
Nice.
Very, very similar. So we have a pepper ball launcher, which is like a paintball gun, which launches, it's pneumatic. The legislation deals with firearm-based weapons, such as the beanbag shotgun, the 4mm launcher that uses a firearm primer. So those are prohibited. The FN-303 and the pepper ball use a pneumatic launcher, so they're allowed. That's the difference. Okay. But yeah, it's an impact weapon. The FN-303 doesn't have quite the kick that the beanbag launcher or the 40mm launcher has. In fact, we had a situation where we were trying to break out a window with it and tried 6 times and it failed. So it has some, but not quite the impact that we would like. It's a good tool, but not good for every situation.
Right.
So going through our use of force, like I said, we use force in approximately 3% of all arrests, which means 97% of the time we're not using any type of force beyond the person's compliant. It's compliant handcuffing, compliant escort, those type of things. We responded to, like I said, 38,364 incidents in 2021. And only on 38 occasions, or less than 1/1000% of the time, were we required to use force. Now, if you compare that to Seattle in 2018, they reported out of 400,000 incidents, they used force upon only 0.18% of the time. That's less than 1% as well, which is also extremely low. But we're even lower than them. So just kind of gives you an idea of putting things into context. Again, we're able to de-escalate and avoid the use of force in over 97% of all of our arrests. So here we go. So out of the use of 38 uses of force, we had 6 officers receive minor injuries. Again, that's about a third down from last year or the year prior. In 2021, we had 12 suspects, or about a third of all uses of force received some type of injury. And that's a reduction of about 42% from the prior year. But understand when we say injury, we take a very broad view of what injury is. That means a minor bruise, scratch, a taser bro puncture, complaint of pain, anything like that is considered an injury to the suspect when we do our analysis. Of that, none of the injuries were serious and none required hospitalization. So again, very pleased with how we're treating our public and how we're treating those that we need to take into custody. This gives you a breakdown, again, of the types of force used, whether injury resulted to the officer or the suspect, whether it was someone suffering a mental episode or under the influence of drugs, and also the breaks down the race of the suspect. Again, you'll notice there's an even dispersion, which is reflective of the demographics of our city. Even though it is such a small segment of data, it's not a direct correlation, but the ratios are consistent with our demographics. Again, breakdown by whether or not it was a felony crime, a misdemeanor crime, or a mental health crisis. Of the 38 times, majority of the time it was felony crime, then a misdemeanor crime. Then prior to the legislation for mental health crisis, after that, we weren't able to help on mental health incidents. And again, we're trying to address that in House Bill 2037. There's the breakdown visually in a graph in a pie chart. And this pie chart for the race for use as a force. Again, majority being white. Then the next is Black, Asian, Native American, frankly unknown, and then Hispanic. Speaking to 2021, crime trends that we see in 2021, dramatic increase in auto thefts, vehicle prowls, and catalytic converter thefts. These are all hot topic items at the legislature right now. We saw either a decrease or a stabilization of burglaries. Everybody was home in 2020, so residential burglaries and actually commercial burglaries as well were very low. We're seeing some increase, but they're still within the lower than the 5-year crime trends that we've seen. And then when you go to mail theft and package thefts, those are maintained rather level. We had a spike after the COVID payment came in the form of a gift card in the mail. We saw a spike in mail thefts. After that stopped, our mail thefts went down. Some package thefts that are seasonal, we saw some of that. Again, but working with folks to bring doorbell cameras and some other applications and social media, we've been pretty effective in stemming the tide of those. Go to some charts. Again, auto thefts are very high. I can give you some reasons for why auto thefts are so high. One, you can't pursue folks, you can't stop them under the current legislation. The other issue with auto thefts, the prosecution is very, very limited and weak. I've been told it takes almost 5 separate car thefts before you actually get any time. It's considered a non-violent offense. Very difficult to even book somebody into the local jail under current COVID restrictions for theft of a vehicle.
Who's making that call? Is that the prosecuting attorney's office or?
Well, as far as prosecutions, they're confined by state law, and by, as far as the prosecutor, as far as booking them into the jail, that has to do with trying to keep the populations as low as possible to prevent infection and the spread of virus. I can tell you, for example, locally, Olympia Jail was decimated by the virus. Most of their staff came down with it. They had to transfer prisoners to other facilities for a short period of time until they're able to recover. Vehicle prowls. Interesting thing about vehicle prowls, we were having a spike there, as you see in October to 55. With a single arrest, we cut that number by over 1/3. It was rather a prolific person doing most of these. And interesting in Lacey, a lot of times there we have a local actor or a local person involved in the majority of a certain type of crime. And if we can identify that person, take them into custody, it has a dramatic impact on the crime trends. So we're looking with our crime analyst and with patrol, we're able usually to identify that person fairly quickly and get them into custody. And that helps to stem dramatic crime trends. As you know, catalytic converter thefts are through the roof. And that is going throughout the nation, not alone through the region. A lot of aggravating factors with that. They're trying to look at that. The legislature, we really haven't come up with an effective tool as far as law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, and the legislature. We've talked about engraving catalytic converters. There's a lot of issues to it, but frankly, until manufacturers harden where they're located in the vehicle so they can't be easily stolen, I think this will continue to be a problem. If you make it so that you have to have ID to turn it in, they'll simply turn to shipping them overseas, because we've seen that as well. Well, they'll be turned into bulk, put on cargo containers, and then taken to a jurisdiction where they don't look so closely. So
where are these being turned into for dollars? Is it just junkyards or?
metal recyclers are taking them, but it's not real clear how this whole pattern is happening. We're still trying to develop intelligence on that as far as law enforcement. They're being taken out of state a lot of times, and once they're out of state, they can't track where it came from and who it's from and what it's from. They'll be they cut it off the car, they turn it into somebody else that turns into somebody else, and it gets daisy chained to the final metal seller. And then a gray market realtor or actor will take them into, not realtor, business person will take and under a legitimate business and say, here, I've got an auto wrecking yard and I'm turning in 20 for my auto wrecking yard. Well, that's not where they got them, right? So the same way you'll see gray market with cannabis, you'll see gray market with catalytic converters and car parts and different things. So unfortunately, we haven't come to a real good solution on it yet. I know we're looking at the legislature and they're asking for solutions. WASP's been looking for solutions. The short answer is try to get them engraved and try to get people to have to use ID, can only turn in theirs from their own vehicle to register to them, those type of things. That's a short-term solution, but as far as a larger solution, so they don't start shipping them overseas, really haven't come to a good solution on that yet. I think really getting the manufacturers to harden the vehicle is probably the best thing we're going to be able to get to, so they can't get to it easily. So, all right. Burglaries, again, fairly stable over a long period of time. You see blips seasonally, but still we're below the 11-year, 5-year average of about 11 or so per month. New programs in 2021. We really have worked on improved recruitment, selection, and hiring over the last 2 years. We've hired over 19 officers during the past 2 years. And as you know, the city of Lacey, we usually hire 1 or 2 a year. So this is a dramatic increase, working to really increase our staffing. I've done in-person recruitment at written tests that seems to play pretty well. We pay their test fees to get them applied to Lacey. We've streamlined our hiring and background process, but still making sure that everyone we hire has some type of connection to Lacey to make sure that we're always engaged in community policing. Our mobile outreach teams, as you well know from Olympic Health and Recovery Services, have been an extension of our community resource unit, have been having great success. Our rapid response teams, cleaning up encampments, cleaning up debris, cleaning up graffiti have been amazing. Our MOUs with WashDOT and DOE are truly at the vanguard of dealing with these type of problems and have had great success. And I think that model will probably be copied by other jurisdictions. As I said, we added our traffic officer out of patrol so they can operate independently. And as staffing improves, we'll add a second traffic officer, fully staff our school resource program, and work on augmenting some other areas of the department. So, sorry. Okay, so that ends my presentation. I'll stop sharing.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief. Any questions?
Thanks, Chief.
Mayor or Ed, any questions for Chief?
No.
Great presentation. Thank you for all the great work. I hear it from the public fairly often about how just incredibly great the Lacey PD is. And they really, I think there's a lot of respect in our community for the work that our officers do. So I think it's a really good testament to the people that you have under you.
So I'll share a quick story. So in addition to law enforcement, we do a lot of public events and public engagement. Recently had the Boys and Girls Club Dress for Success event at Kohl's, getting them ready for their presentations this week. And so Lacey Police is there with Olympia and Thurston County Police and deputies and all that. We're standing there, we're all in uniform by Kohl's. Folks are coming up, hey, is everything okay? Like, yeah, no, we're just doing an event. It's for the kids. And, oh, great. And thank you for your service. Really appreciate you guys. And the Olympia and Thurston County are like, wow, that's kind of unusual. No, that's how it is in Lacey. You guys should think about coming up. So thank you to the public. You're my best recruiting tool. I tell folks Lacey is special. We do not take it for granted that how well we're treated by our community. And the biggest compliment we get is that our officers are just members of the community that happen to be wearing a uniform. So thank you for the support. We really appreciate it.
And I
That's
do have
awesome.
one question, and if it's inappropriate at this time, just tell me so and I'll stop. But the two officers involved in the incident the other day, how are they?
They're doing okay. We've been in contact with them nonstop, and they're doing okay. Obviously, there's the process they're proceeding as it needs to. That's being handled by the Capital Metro Investigative Team, which is independent. As you know, under I-940 guidelines, we don't investigate ourselves usually in anything involving a deadly use of force. That process is being conducted. We have two Lacey community representatives attached to that process, and adding transparency to that process. And I appreciate their work on this. It's important, and I think we have a very good process.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief. Okay, we do have one more item on our agenda today, which is the tree maintenance program. And Russell Greer with us. There you are. All right. I will turn it over to you.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here to share with you some stuff about how Lacey deals with trees. I'm gonna go ahead and put it on presentation mode here. There it is. And all right, so I've been with the city for about 6 years and in my current position for about 4 months. And we've been working hard to maintain the city trees in our department, all the city-owned trees in our department. Let me just get going here. So the Public Works Department has 3 different aspects to the trees that we maintain. So we maintain the urban forests, the Lacey-owned properties and facilities, and then the right-of-way in some of the select arterials. And this is the department that we're in. So I'm under Jamie Oakland and Scott Devlin in the maintenance department. And then I have a crew of 6 people to help me maintain the trees, as well as the rest of the parks department also helps maintain the trees. So the right-of-way department, we kind of line out the work, but the other departments within the parks department also are very involved. And the streets department is also very involved. So our general costs for our tree operation throughout the years is about $500,000 every year, with little spikes. So we have a spike here where we bought a brand new bucket truck, replacing an old bucket truck that was going out of service. But those costs include labor and benefits and the materials that we use, and as well as contracted services and capital purchases. So our tree maintenance program has 4 different main aspects to it. So we identify all the hazards and we try to mitigate those hazards. Oh, sorry. We plant and replace the trees that we have to remove. We prune trees for both health of the tree and for visibility and make customers happy, as well as for clearance. And then the streets department mainly does infrastructure damage remediation, and we'll go over that in a few minutes. So we have quite a bit of area. We have about 416 acres of forest, both in our parks department as well as in undeveloped properties that the city maintains. That has 11 linear miles of shared property line, and within those linear miles of shared property, we have 507 neighbors that we try to help do our best to mitigate hazards surrounding those neighbors and keep them happy with us and maintain the trees to a healthy level. Let's see. That was a picture of Wonderwood Park that you saw there in the last slide. So our tree hazard evaluation program, we contract that out so that it's a separate entity that's going through and viewing. So they'll on a 3-year cycle view all of the properties that we own throughout the city, and they'll assess whether there's hazardous trees that have a target. So if there's a tree in the middle of a forested section and there's nobody ever walking in those sections, then we leave it and we let it degrade naturally. But if the tree is dying or dead and it's within reach of a fence line or a bathroom or anything that could cause hazard to property or people, then we will go through and we'll remove it. And this is just across the slide of what those evaluations look like. So our hazard tree removal process is generally, so we have those hazards identified, and then we remove as many as possible within our own crew. So I'll usually go out and I'll look at the hazards and I'll look at all the trees that we've identified, and then I'll make a plan to see who we need to do that process, whether we can do it in-house or whether we need to contract those out. And it's been about 20% of the trees in the last 5 years that we've been contracting out. And you'll see that one big spike, that was the microburst, where we had to remove many, many more trees than are normal. And feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions.
So
yeah, go ahead.
What is our process of when we remove a tree? Do we plant a tree?
Yeah, we generally plant at least 2 to 1. So every tree that we remove, we try to plant at least 2 more trees.
And are you trying to plant a similar tree to what's there, or is there, you have a?
So if it's within a right of way along the streets, then we'll plant a similar or the same species of tree if those are available. But if it's within a forested section, it depends on what we think would do best in that area. So so we've been trying to change to more climate resistant, as well as if there's we've had a lot of root rot in our areas, so we've gone with a lot of root rot resistant trees recently. So the private contractors can be fairly expensive when we have to remove trees. They can, this was one of the more expensive trees that we had to remove, and this was just a few months ago. It was about $13,000, but we obviously couldn't do it with our own equipment, and that's the main reason we hire private contractors, is they have the ability to climb trees, so they have skills that that we don't possess, and they have tools that we don't use. And it also helps to be able to use private contractors to take the liability away from the city sometimes with some more complex and dangerous trees, and keep our crew members safe. And you can see from 2012 to 2021, we hired more contractors in those previous years, and then as we had more highly skilled workers join the force in 2015, we've hired many less contractors. So additional removals. So we do a lot of removals that are referrals from either members of the public or members of our own crews. Being that we have crews out in the city on a regular basis, they see dead trees and they report them to me, and then I'll go out and decide whether or not we need to remove those trees. The vast majority of the trees are either reported from members of the public, or trees hit by cars that need to be immediately removed, or neighbors of or crew members that see those trees that are a immediate danger to the public. So as you can see here, it's about 47% of the trees that we remove are immediate hazards. And then 21% is vehicle damage, so accidents, knocking trees at an angle or completely removing them. And then those independent assessments are the other 32%. And this is a fairly average year. So this is where the 2-to-1 ratio. So we far exceed the 2-to-1 ratio of planting to removals, but we definitely make sure to at least meet that ratio. And the first couple of years that so oftentimes we'll buy a few hundred seedlings every year, and we'll let those grow in the greenhouse and mature for a year or two, and then we'll go out and plant them. This last year, we've tried planting them directly, which is why we planted so many more this last year, just to kind of see how that'll play out, whether the survivability will be high or not.
Is there opportunities for the public to donate trees or seedlings? I'm curious. I have a cedar tree for example, in my house that or my yard that was affected by the microburst years ago. And since that initial damage to the tree, it's been putting out seedlings all over my yard. And so I have like a bunch of them. I'm not quite sure what to do with them. If I can't let them just grow everywhere.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I don't want to just pull them and, if they could be redonated somehow. Is that possible?
Yeah. In our department, we could take them probably, but we've never done that in the past. There's also the yearly Arbor Days where the trees are given to members of the public who come in, and that might be something that could be connected in with. So generally during those Arbor Days event, members of the public are invited to come get one free plant that live in the city of Lacey are invited to come get one free tree or shrub and plant it in their own yard. That seems like a good use for that.
Okay.
I don't remember who the organizer of that event is, but I can try to get that to you.
Thank you.
So street tree replacements is quite a process. So we work closely with the streets department to remove the roots. And of course we have to get go out and make sure that there's no utilities in the area. And then we have oftentimes have the vac-on truck come and pressure wash around the roots. And the whole process of removing and replacing a tree takes about 9.5 hours of labor. And these trees can die from so many different reasons: pests, drought, car damage, storms, and you name it. Also, oftentimes the streets department has to remove trees due to heaving sidewalks, because if the trees just outgrow their area, they'll start to push that sidewalk up. So our tree pruning program is vastly affected by the year and the weather. So some years we don't have major weather events, and we don't have COVID, and we can all work together and we can prune large amounts of trees. We generally prune January, February, because it's the healthiest time of the year to prune the tree. this last year and this year is going to be the same. We're really trying to not work in closely together. So our numbers are going to be lower than usual. But we prune for both clearance, so prune to make it so big trucks can get through. We prune for visibility for street signs and such, as well as for the health of the tree. And we try to do it on a cycle. So our leaf removal process has really improved in the last 4 or 5 years since we started renting a street sweeper. So it used to be that we would go and push buckets along the side of the road and remove the leaves by hand. And now we blow all the leaves into the street and sweep them all up, and at least for the right-of-way sections. And it makes it much safer for the crew, as well as much more efficient. So we don't have to spend quite as much time collecting the leaves. So as you can see here, in the last few years, we've like 252 yards last year and 121 yards in parks. So still the vast majority of our leaves are within the right-of-way sections, where the majority of our trees are pushing leaves into areas where they cause problems, clogging storm drains and such. So this slide is, this is what the streets department really helps us with trees. So if a sidewalk is pushing up from street trees more than 1/4 inch, we try to remove, or the streets department tries to remove that sidewalk and replace the sidewalk panel, or pull it up and remove the tree and then put the same sidewalk panel down, depending on if the panel itself is damaged. But that oftentimes, if not always, means they have to remove the tree to do it. And then we go back through the Parks Department and helps and replace the tree. So they spent 2,900 hours last year, and about $99,000. And this is something we've tried to prevent in the last 10 years with current trees that we're planting by putting in root barrier, which has been shown nationwide to be pretty effective in reducing sidewalk heaving. So we also have challenges that are coming about with climate change and homelessness. So we had a couple of fires last year, which is unusual for us in our Parks Department. One of them, they had to have the DNR fire crew come and put out, and another one, our own brush truck was able to come and put out. And then you can see the tree on the left has drought stress, so the top of it's died out. And I'm sure you see those throughout town. That's a pretty common thing that we're having to deal with, and by trying to replace trees with more resistant, or trying to put replacement trees that are more resistant.
Russell,
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
not to rush you or anything, but how much longer do you have? Because we have another meeting that starts in 3 minutes.
As the last slide is the next slide. So
Okay, great. Thank you.
Definitely. So we're moving forward. So we got a crew that's really vested in the work that we do. We have 3 employees that are ISA certified, which is a high level of certification. We have 5 more working towards it. We're transitioning into planting a wired variety. We talked about that. Capital improvement projects, heating sidewalk panels, replacing those. There's a new update in the urban forestry management plan that's changing the trees that we actually plant that are less susceptible to heaving sidewalks, and we're keeping up with industry standards. Does anybody have any questions?
Can you stop sharing?
Yeah, I'm doing that. End slideshow. Stop sharing. All right. There we go.
Any questions?
Just a comment. I know we're spend about $500,000 a year as is shown, but I think it's a really important $500,000. It's one of the visible things that we do for our public. We're a tree city. that means we also have to maintain our trees and plant trees. And so I think it's, this is a really important part of our quality of life. And so it's, thank you for your work. And I think, we need to continue to do it.
Thanks. Yeah, we enjoy it. Thank you.
Ed, anything?
I'm good.
All right, well, thank you, Russell. Excellent report. Really appreciate it. And not to cut it short, but we do have our next meeting in like a minute here. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to adjourn this meeting. Thank you all. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.